I'm Vanessa Briggs, President and CEO of the Brandywine Health Foundation, and welcome to our part two, Black Philanthropy. Let's talk unified giving. We are so excited that we have over 75 people who have registered for this virtual event. And so we want to know who we're talking to. So please enter your name in the chat, your organization, and your affiliation, because we want this to be an engaging conversation. So feel free to add any comments and questions during the dialogue. And depending on how much we chat and how much chatter is in the chat, we may have some time at the end of this conversation to answer some last minute questions. And so again, we are super, super excited to have this conversation and talk with all of you. And you're probably wondering, why unified giving, and what does unified giving really, really mean? And so at the Brandywine Health Foundation, and I'm sure that our panelists also agree with this, and many of you agree, that going back to normal is just not an option. Equity is not distributed equally among communities. And so we believe that now is the time to target long-term giving and investment strategies to our distressed communities, and particularly when we're talking about our Black and Brown communities who have been disproportionately and continue to be devastated by the impact of the coronavirus. And so we walk alongside of KeyBank, our sponsor for this particular event, and we are so grateful for their generous support and thanking them to support this conversation. KeyBank is making strides in doing business fairly and responsibly by promoting diversity and inclusion and making meaningful investments where people work, live, and play and pray. And so thank you, KeyBank, for your support. We are super, super excited. At the Brandywine Health Foundation, our mission really is to advance a more equitable and resilient, healthier, greater Coatesville. But really, in order to achieve that, the staff and the board realize that we have to take some bold steps and we have to do things differently. And so we're taking some bold steps and we're embedding racial equity in all that we do. That's from our grant making to our investment strategies, to lifting up our community voice initiative, and even hosting conversations like this that sometimes can be uncomfortable conversations for many. And so we're excited to do that. And so what we're also excited about is our unified giving. And unified giving at the Brandywine Health Foundation is a brand new giving strategy that we're launching. Unified giving emphasizes the imperative that equitable distribution in giving of resources to nonprofit leaders, organizations, especially those led by people of color and those serving communities of color on the front lines, because we know that those individuals and those communities continue to live inequitably in the margins of society. And we need to look at our investment practices and how we're supporting these communities. One of the 9 guiding principles and values within the Brandywine Health Foundation is that we certainly believe that lived experiences and perceptions of the diverse body of individuals, including our nonprofits, our philanthropic sector, and the community, uniquely and collectively bring new vision and strategies, along with solutions to solving some of our most complex long-term societal issues. And we, like you, we acknowledge and recognize that race plays a part when it comes to access to resources, services, and opportunities. And so it is our hope that you are inspired by this conversation and that you join the Brandywine Health Foundation as we launch our new unified giving strategy, because we really do want to improve the life for all. And so with that being said, I would love to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Isabel Pryor, who is a board member and she serves as our treasurer. She's also our co-chair for our finance committee. And in her day job, she is also a member of the KeyBank team. And so she answers all my calls, all hours of the night. And so I say her day job because I also think Brandywine Health Foundation is her full-time job. So with that being said, I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Isabel Pryor.
Thank you, Vanessa. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome our esteemed panelists today in what I hope to be, which I know will be, a very stimulating conversation about how corporations are weaving their social responsibility strategies in response to the impact of COVID-19, the racial reckoning that we saw come about in late May with the death and murder of George Floyd. So around the conversations about racial equity. So the panelists that we're going to have today are these leaders in national or regional organizations will share with us how the prism of giving has to change. And the time is now to target long-term giving and investments in our distressed communities to ensure the equitable distribution of all resources to transform communities. So with that, I want to say a warm welcome to Tiffany Tavares, who hails from Wells Fargo. A little caveat, I am also a former Wells Fargo employee, so it's great to see someone from the ship.
So you're saying we're practically cousins, you're saying?
Literally.
Literally.
we're practically cousins. And I believe she's going to add such a wonderful color around what it is to lift distressed communities and the projects in Coatesville around housing, employment, and youth leadership development. Again, with that whole racial focus. Then we have Ramona Risco Benson from PICO. So we did say regional, right? So PICO really focuses on workforce development, and we want to see how that works, especially with a community like Coatesville, where is our service area for the Brandywine Health Foundation. And then last but not least, we have Charmaine Matlock-Turner. And Charmaine hails from Urban Coalition, which is a nonprofit enterprise. And Charmaine's point of view will be more on the collaborative nature of giving. And so I'm actually interested in what she has to say, which I think is going to be fantastic. We've had a schedule change. I think everyone will see that Kim Brombaugh of Brombaugh Wealth Management was invited, and she was going to be on the panel. But I'm in wealth management, and this is the busiest time for us in wealth management. So these things happen. Emergency meetings have to get taken care of for our clients. So we will miss her perspective, but we hope to potentially have another series and probably bring her in, because I believe having that more local focus on what corporate giving looks like is important in this conversation as well. So what I'm going to do, we will go ahead and start with Ramona, and please introduce yourself. And then we'll move to Tiffany and then Charmaine. If you can just give a brief introduction of your organization and who you are. So, Ramona?
Oops. So sorry.
Love Zoom.
Oh my gosh. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Isabel. I am grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this panel today. And I also want to give a wonderful shout out to Vanessa and the board members of the foundation for driving this conversation and the ongoing conversations that you are having about this. I am PICO's Director of Corporate and Community Relations, and I direct PICO's corporate social responsibility strategy. That includes overseeing the distribution of over $7 million in contributions and sponsorships for nonprofit organizations in our regional service region. And as well, we manage the company's community engagement programs focused on products and services for our low-income customers. And this year we have added a workforce development team that is focusing on those very necessary initiatives that are associated with employment, placement, and opportunities in the utility sector. And with that, I will say again, I'm very happy to be a part of this panel today. Look forward to my good friends, Charmaine and Tiffany, and the wonderful conversation that we will have.
All right, Tiffany, can you give us a little bit about you?
Sure. So to Ramona's point, I want to thank Vanessa and the Brandywine Health Foundation Board of Directors for hosting such an important conversation, especially during this time. I have been with Wells Fargo serving as Vice President of Community Relations for the past actually 3 years. It's been a wild and lovely 3 years. And actually, just to shout out some of my community and philanthropic experience actually is inclusive of Pico, an Exelon company. So I know and love Ramona dearly and have known Charmaine for a number of years, actually, I think a little over a decade, but we won't tell anybody. So the Wells Fargo Foundation actually this year, back on March 20th, committed $175 million to COVID-19 relief to organizations that work primarily in our 3 focus areas of housing affordability, small business, as well as financial health. With some allocated funding towards some what's considered kind of local market efforts. We're really proud, obviously, to be here. We understand that when it comes to these sorts of efforts in terms of finding solutions for systemic problems, it requires collaboration. And so we really look to leaders like Vanessa for some thought leadership around that, especially during this unique and unprecedented time, especially right now, because we're in the midst, as you can imagine, for planning of 2021. And we need to put on some innovation and creative thinking caps, because right now, our inability to fully address the inequity in our problems will just further cultivate the inequity in our solutions. And so we're looking forward to this conversation and hearing from our peers to see what is it that we can do moving forward.
Great, thank you. Charmaine.
Hi, everyone. It is so good to be here and to get a chance to say hello. I too want to thank Vanessa and certainly the Brandywine Health Foundation for really leading this terrific conversation. I am celebrating, I can't believe it, Ramona and Tiffany, who I love dearly. Both of these women are fantastic. I could just be in the audience. That's what took me a little while to get here. I was in the audience group because I could just really sort of listen to them. But I've been at the coalition getting ready to celebrate my 22nd year. I am the first woman to lead the organization. And it was a group of women who came together and said to the past executive director, there's never been a woman in that job. And we think we have the right person who should apply for that job. And so we want her to be seriously considered. So I appreciate the love and sponsorship that women and women of color have given me as I've worked through my career. We are now the largest, what's known as fiscal sponsor or provider of shared services led by an African American in the country. We have over 80 programs and projects that are a part of the coalition family. And I want to give a shout out to Coatesville Towers, where we have done some work around financial literacy and financial education. And we love the fact that you've invited us to be a part of the community. So feel free to reach out to us. And we have this year about $70 million under management across all of our programs and projects. And we have successfully managed over $1 billion. But as I say to people in the broader community, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into conversations, even with the kind of track record and credentials we have at UAC as an African American led nonprofit, many of us still start from $0 at the beginning of the fiscal year and have to start all over again. So this conversation is critically important. I'm so glad to be a part of it and looking forward to hearing questions and comments from everybody this afternoon. So thank you.
Well, I have to say this. If those introductions don't impress you, I don't know what else will. I'm impressed, but more than anything else, I think you're getting the feel that this is going to be an engaging conversation. I will be asking some questions, but given the history of these ladies with each other, which by the way, when we put this together, we were unaware of to the degree and the extent. So I know it's going to be very engaging. It's going to be very exciting. So I'm going to start with you, Ramona. So you're coming from PICO, you're coming from a, again, national, regional company. When you were asked to be on this panel and it was described to you what this was going to be about, what were your first thoughts about this unified giving? Like when you heard that, what did you think?
So it's interesting because, of course, Vanessa gave me kind of like the summary of where the organization was going and in introducing this concept. And I appreciate Brandywine Health's journey. It's on something that is a journey the organization has been on prior to this year. And so the idea of examining its priorities and purpose is quite an undertaking. And the onset of the pandemic and racial justice concerns that have come up this year certainly have placed an urgency for many in the giving community and what and how things need to be addressed, how we respond to and initiate things. So unified giving, signals to me an interest in leading conversations about community needs being addressed and an interest in collaborative funding opportunities to drive impact. So at the beginning of her opening, Vanessa certainly talked about having an interest in moving to equitable giving. This signals to us the effects of COVID, the screaming need to address racial inequities, that the sheer need of so many will have to be recognized and be addressed for many years to come. So we have come together to address strategies for change. And that is what I thought about with the concept of unified giving when I heard about it.
Great. Thank you. So one of the ways that, I really want to bring in your personal perspective on this. Because you've been in this for a minute, right? In this nonprofit, in this giving space, how does your personal passion and your lived experience being a Black woman allow you to lean into your work a little bit differently, even though you may encounter others who may or may not understand or even support what it is that you're trying to advance? Because we all know what it is to show up as a Black woman in certain industries, in certain spaces. So how's your personal perspective on that?
Indeed. And I think the way you have framed the question is very important. Certainly my personal experiences drive my passion for my work and how it fuels PICO's giving strategy moving forward. My maternal grandparents were born and raised in South Carolina. During their school age years, Black children were only allowed to attend public school up to the 8th grade. In some parts of the state, there were private school workarounds for that. However, my grandparents did not have the means nor access to go beyond. The law wasn't changed until after World War II. Their experiences in the segregated South and others faced by family and friends have fueled my personal interest in the injustices I've seen or faced over the years and the roles I've undertaken. That South Carolina law is an example of structural institutional racism that exists in other forms today. And in fact, it drives an environment of inequity, poverty, and its root causes: underfunded public education, health disparities, food insecurities, joblessness, and homelessness. These structural issues existed before the pandemic, and as we know, these issues now are exacerbated. My personal passion drives my work. We are instituting a reset on PICO giving, the areas that will provide more emphasis on things such as workforce development, giving to organizations with proven missions, supporting residents and communities that are under-resourced, and we've established a workforce development team. They are charged with identifying and removing barriers that will allow residents of the communities we serve to work in the energy sector at PICO and other related companies, with an eye on placement, tracking, and barrier elimination. All of these are with the prism of equity and social justice. I also, though, want to take a moment to discuss the onset of the pandemic and what we have been able to accomplish there. We immediately had to reassess the needs of our community partners and what stood out as rapid response for families and the nonprofit sector. The leadership of the Philanthropy Network, Philadelphia Foundation, Regional United Ways, Brandywine Health Foundation, along with the corporate community. In addition to PICO, of course, Wells Fargo, always at the table, IBC, Comcast, and others were critical as we all work to quickly assemble an infrastructure to support the exponential need. PICO, in partnership with the Exelon Foundation, was able to direct over $1 million to this effort, even while lifting grant restrictions, rapidly executing grant payments, and other measures to support our nonprofit community partners. So as you can see, my personal passion drives my work. My work is in full alignment with a company that practices its DEI values, including its various equity initiatives, and has leadership that welcomes ideas and opportunities to address how to continue improvements for our communities, employees, and customers. Thank you.
That's great. It's a great correlation. I want to bring it back to that unified giving because, and also talking about collaboration, it seems that, PICO is doing that in all of what you're talking about with the foundation and reaching out and working with, Wells. And I think that's what we really want to push. How can we push the conversation into action of unified giving? Because donors will come from, we want to get donors from all over. We want people to come together and really reach down and give to those grassroots organizations that are Black-led, that are BIPOC-led. So that's great. I mean, it's wonderful.
And we certainly are open to ideas around how more can be done, where we can come together as a collective group to identify where we can have more of a significant impact. So, this is an important conversation today for sure.
Great. Thank you. Tiffany, I'm going to turn to you now.
I'm ready.
You're ready? Now, when the racial reckoning happened, we saw organizations, corporations come and put out statements. We saw, Ramona spoke about structural racism. And I think there are certain industries that have a long history of policies that sort of uplift and keep those structural racist policies into place. So a lot of organizations put out these statements and in support of Black Lives Matter, in support of communities and allocating dollars, whether it be a Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Key Bank. So I want to take it for you on the corporate perspective and incorporating that racial equity lens. I mean, really doing it when you're inside. So what, can you give us one or two of the strategies that really at Wells right now that is really using that racial equity lens specifically?
Sure. No, well, first and foremost, I appreciate that very challenging question. I know that a lot of corporations are dealing with that. And thank you to KeyBank for being a sponsor. So let's just start there. Secondly, look, there's never going to be a shortage of organizations that have DEI missions and statements, especially in light of this year, which is great, and that's totally fine. But at the end of the day, for both me personally and professionally, individuals are what make up the organizations, and that if you don't adhere personally to your own DEI values and mission, then you cannot expect a professional output or outcome that's going to benefit an entire community. It has to be, first of all, important to the individual leaders themselves in order for them to actually see it out in their organizations with their respective teams. So there are a couple things, for us that we've done. And again, for me, myself, I'm taking myself into that accountability as well. So as I mentioned back on March 20th, we allocated all of our $175 million in giving this year towards COVID-19 relief. And so COVID-19 relief in the majority of these instances meant general operating support. Limiting funding to only programmatic, to be honest, it's quite a luxury. Many organizations, especially those led by people of color and led by women, do not have the luxury of simply and constantly asking for programmatic support. I think it's 20% of giving to nonprofits in this country from large corporations, or oftentimes, I think 20% of it's only unrestricted. It's creating this starvation cycle. So I think that in order for us to really be equitable, we have to start including general operating support to organizations targeting, again, organizations led by women and by people of color. So with that, we actually reached out to those nonprofits that are in our portfolio that are led by and serving historically marginalized communities to ensure that they receive COVID-19 relief support, and actually most of the time increasing that support to help during this time. And I'll be quite honest, it was, to Ramona's point, it was something to see for all of us to come together to really strategize around how we're going to help our communities. And that's the thing, you cannot do this by yourself, right? Even as an entity, you still have to connect with other corporations to see what is a best practice. And so for us to have the opportunity to connect with Vanessa and hear about your healthcare and economic fund and say, you know what, that's going to be a really great investment, because the capacity for both on the nonprofit and corporate side to constantly, deal with questions and individual problems as they come in is really challenging. And that collective impact was a really fantastic opportunity for us this year, impacting the greater Philadelphia market, obviously inclusive of Coatesville. Additionally, we've actually had provided, even prior to the special year that 2020 is and has been, capacity building grants through our Community Leadership Initiative program that enabled nonprofits, again, led by women and people of color, for funding that enabled them to build capacity through training and development. Conferences, training, education, all of that type of support is expensive, and oftentimes there aren't enough resources to help those particular communities of leaders. And so we provide capacity building funding to ensure that we're supporting those BIPOC leaders just as equally as those that may be well-resourced. And the one specific example I'll provide, and I'll be sure to share this particular resource, I have a wonderful colleague named Monica Mitchell. She's my counterpart in the DC and Baltimore market. And again, leveraging relationships and those types of collaborations, we collaborated with the Association of Black Charities. We invested in them for a particular project that's actually a set of remarkable resources called 10 Essential Questions. Again, I will share that link. So there are 4 different themes and topics in which this resource guide provides. The theme that Wells Fargo invested in is around philanthropic grant making policies and practices. So this is, it's been a pocket guide, a concrete educational tool, if you will, for both institutions as well as institutional philanthropic donors wanting to translate their commitment to justice and equity. Because I think that oftentimes the word justice is left off, and I think that we need to be more intentional about including justice when it comes to equity, but also applying it practically in our grant making and more importantly, to rethink and potentially redesign how we operate as a bank with race at the forefront. So it's a great tool that we've been able to utilize, and it's a framework that we're going to fully adopt, not just within our grant making, but across all business lines, right? Because we don't want to work in silos. So that's one of the many ways in which we're looking at that now.
Isabel, I wanted to share with you that I think Howard Tucker, who's the CEO of Better Tomorrow, he actually happens to be a grant partner of the Brandywine House Foundation, is saying kudos to Tiffany. General operating support is the key. A lot of the panel of the guests that are on this chat are really our nonprofit partners, and they recognize the benefit and value of general operating support. So thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that comment. And look, oftentimes when nonprofits, and they'll facilitate a fantastic program, get fantastic results. And so there's fear of losing that potential investment. And, let's not talk about the struggle to keep the lights on. Shout out to Pico, right? But you don't want to talk about that. But to be honest, I think that, if there's going to be ever a time to really to be honest, articulate the importance of general operating and really state your case, it's this year during this time, because to be honest, the health of a program, and that's going successfully, great. But if the health of your organization is at risk, that program is no longer going to exist. So I think that to be honest and transparent about that as much as possible is going to really benefit you.
Tiffany, one of the interesting things that you brought up as to what Wells Fargo is doing, it's really pinpointing the use of a racial equity and justice lens. And I kind of want to sort of talk about that, because what we see typically is what you're saying. These dollars don't reach those Black-led organizations, right? So whether it's coming from a corporate, and that seems to be, this is what I've learned coming into this philanthropic space, is that the dearth of funding of those dollars, we have trillions of dollars that are in the nonprofit space. And I believe I read, and I can't remember if it was the Green, I can't remember what article, but it was less than 7% of those funds actually go to Black-led and women-led organizations that are on the ground, those grassroots. So it's this juxtaposition of philanthropy is actually not meeting what it sets out as its goal of helping those in distressed communities. So it's great. And I want to definitely give a kudos to Wells Fargo. And is that part of your accountability, your personal accountabilities, that you want to make sure that your teammates keep that in the back of their minds?
Oh, Isabel, how much time do you have? Well, look, no, I accept and receive and appreciate the kudos, but I think like everybody else, we are all a work in progress. I will say this, I've been really blessed and lucky and privileged to have a very, diverse work portfolio. I've worked at a nonprofit, I've worked at a university, I've worked for a foundation, I've worked for various corporations. And so I have been able to see on the ground level what this work is. There are many who work in grant making have only ever worked in grant making, have only known to have a pretty extensive budget. And so their perspective is very different than mine. I mean, look, and I've shared this before with many of you personally, and I have no problem sharing here, which is I, growing up, have had to take advantage of the very programs that this corporation, as well as others, have invested in. I grew up having to use food banks, right? Dealing with food insecurities. The fact of the matter is the same exact, version of Tiffany, 30 plus years ago exists with our kids right now, right? So what is my responsibility, again, to try to solve that? And how is it that I can ensure that no matter what place I work, again, inclusive of Wells Fargo, takes that just as serious, to say, look, I understand you may not have had to grow up in that position. You've never taken advantage of a food bank, and good for you. But the fact of the matter is, I'm here and I'm a decision maker, and I know that this exists. And so what are we going to do? And it's my responsibility to educate you on the fact that there are people still having the same exact problem. I grew up being a free school lunch kid, and I come in contact with those same kids all the time. And I just think, how do I facilitate opportunities where if they wanted to work at a bank that they could, and how do I facilitate opportunities that the next set of kids they meet aren't continuously free school lunch kids, right? It's got to be something. So it's just a matter of, what problem do you want to target on what day and how much energy do you have for it?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot. It's a lot. And it sort of goes back to, when I was talking to Ramona about her lived experience, right? And we bring, and you're right, as you started out, an organization is made up of individuals, right? Of people coming together. So we thank you for being in that space.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It makes a difference.
It makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference, right? It's like when I hear, oh my goodness, I just can't find any really great, racially diverse members for our board of directors. I was like, do you have Black friends? I mean, honestly, and I mean that sincerely. Like, again, if something is not of personal value to you, you can't expect a professional benefit. Like, they have to mirror one another. So again, okay, I'll hit the mute button now.
Well, I'll say another thing, and then I'm going to go to Charmaine because everything is leading up to Charmaine. So
all things usually do, just FYI.
So one of the things that that I want to highlight, it's the need of who's making those decisions, right? So you sort of you touched on it in your last sentence. Who's making those grant-making decision? If you're in a larger nonprofit, is it a person of color? Is it a woman? Is it someone who comes from an immigrant experience? Is it someone who is transgender, is queer, identifies as queer, so that when you're doling out those dollars, you have that understanding of what it is to be that and that experienced.
No, absolutely. The last point I'll make before I, bow down to Charmaine, that both Charmaine and Ramona actually embody and have cultivated this very statement that I truly believe in, which is, power without influence is like a tree falling in the woods. BIPOC leaders are not simply just working to make progress for themselves. It's about, not getting to this, table of power, but it's about influencing someone so we can start to save more seats. And, I think that I embody that. I think Charmaine and Ramona embody that. And it's not just about us. It's, you're plowing ahead and you're making sure, looking to the sides, make sure that you come up with me. Because otherwise, again, power without influence, like a tree falling in the woods.
Lifting as we rise. So, Charmaine.
There's nothing left for me to say. They've said it all. I'm just letting you know I can't top this.
Yes, you can. So we've heard all of that. We've heard the collaboration. So one of the things, in November of 2019, I read an article in the New York Times. It was by Vanessa Daniel, who's the executive director of Groundswell. That article, and I'll put it in the chat, that article it was really interesting because I read the article, it made an impact, but it didn't, for me, on a personal basis, it didn't really reach me and touch me. And I saw how prescient it was in talking about an issue that's been going on for such a long time until COVID and this racial reckoning. So in her op-ed, she made a case for funding grassroots nonprofits led by people of color. She detailed how nonprofits led by women of color, specifically, nonprofits led by women of color specifically, were overwhelmingly underrepresented in funding. What blew me away was that the statistics she shared for 2016 was that 0.6, not 6%, but 0.6%. That's 60 basis points for those of us in the financial world. A foundation giving was targeted for women of color in 2016. 2016 is right around the corner. It's not like, oh, this is 1954. And it also talked about how these smaller grassroots organizations actually have more agility, are more nimble in delivering for the communities of color that they serve, and how had larger nonprofits collaborated better with these organizations, the impact, because we're talking impact as well. So it's United Giving, it's impact, it's racial equity, it's racial justice. Whether, again, we're targeting BIPOC communities, we're talking LGBTQ plus communities, whether we're talking immigrant communities, or the intersectionality of these. We have these ideas, especially coming from women of color-led organizations. So for you, bring it home, girlfriend.
Well, let me say that you just gave out the history of the Urban Affairs Coalition. That, right, Ramona, right, Tiffany? That's exactly who we are. We started in 1968 after the assassination of Dr. King, where business leaders, we met, for anybody who knows Philadelphia, at the old PSFS building at 12th and Market Streets, came together first and foremost concerned about what was going to happen in Philadelphia. Was there going to be civic unrest? Were there going to be riots in the city of Philadelphia? What was going to happen? And Philadelphia, as many big cities had after the Great Migration, as people moved north, we still isolated people in communities. And then as the jobs that they came for started to disappear, we isolated them even more. And so we had what I call downtown interest, having very little connection to uptown concerns. And so what we wanted to do was to say, we need to marry these things together. So over a weekend after the assassination of Dr. King, business leaders came together and raised $2 million. And they said, we want to, get some money out into the community, primarily as a defense against what they thought could happen to their businesses, their families, and the communities where they lived. We always say it was one of the best investments in Philadelphia ever made because it opened the door for the beginning of a major collaboration across government, business, and communities to begin working on issues. So initially, we started out as a re-granting organization. The business community would raise money. We would say, these are the people and groups that we know in communities. These are the people and ideas that we think should be supported. As we continued to grow and looked at systemic problems on a larger scale, we felt that we really needed an organization to do that. So we started working on collaborations around education. So the High School Academies program was created as a major national initiative out of the coalition. The coalition also worked on issues of ending redlining. So Tiffany, and I'm sure Isabel, you know about the work of the Urban Affairs Coalition and the Philadelphia Plan, which then became the Delaware Valley Mortgage Plan to end redlining in communities of color. That was a major initiative at the coalition. And we've continued those collaborations over time. But also, as people were in communities and they would say, you know what, it's really great that we're getting a couple of little small grants, but we want to build our own organization. So you've given me money so I could take Tiffany and her friends to the movies on Saturday, and then we can talk about, what life is like and what career opportunities might look like. And we begin to build a relationship with an adult who cares about them. They were saying, I'd like to do more of this. I'd like to do this full time. How do I do this? And so people said, oh, no, that's okay. The big nonprofits downtown said, we got this, don't worry about it, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Brown. We'll give you a small grant and then just let us know what's going on. And we, as the big downtown nonprofit, will work on that for you. Well, we know even today, I looked at the numbers this morning, 92% of foundation presidents and large nonprofit leaders are still people who are white. And also many of the people who make decisions about the money, 70% of them still, are not people of color, Black and brown. So what we said at the coalition, hey, wait a minute, these people are doers and dreamers. Why is it that we don't trust The people who know the problem, who know the people, who have the solutions, why don't we trust them? Because they don't have a degree from Harvard in accounting? Is that why we don't trust them? Like, what is it that seems to be? Could it be racism? And so what we said was, okay, if we're concerned about the business of the nonprofit, we'll put together the business of the nonprofit. And that's exactly what we did. We created a shared services model, back office, that to this day has all of the right bells and whistles. The banks know that we know all the rules and regulations, how to do it effectively. We have all the accounting down. We know risk management. We've got the best insurance companies and minority companies working with us on many of these efforts. But we created that structure and that platform so that community organizations could develop their own initiatives. So today, if you look at those who are providing services to those who are housing insecure in Philadelphia, 50% of those programs are a part of the coalition family. And that means that they get to collaborate, connect, drive change. They were on the front lines for COVID when people were talking about what do we need to do to make sure, what do we need to do to make sure that people are going to be safe in this system as advocates. They had that voice and initiative to be able to push that conversation. So we are really big on collaborating, connecting, really bringing people together and supporting grassroots groups. As I said before, we have 80 different initiatives, from someone who might just be a block captain who's working on a block, who's organized around the teens that are there, all the way to people who are doing pre-K programs. We were very concerned when we said we're going to professionalize that area, that community-based pre-K programs were going to not be a part of that effort. And so we put together a whole team to make sure that they applied for whatever their credentialing efforts were and the training initiatives that were available. We have now over 30 programs and initiatives. So anyone knows the Keystone Star System, who started with 0 stars, they're now all 3- and 4-star programs. So we are committed to grassroots leadership, and we know that we can do it well and we can do it smart.
So that's that's impressive. That's so much for me. Like I said, it's for me delving in this world of nonprofit. I'm so used to the corporate environment and working in it. And what I've discovered in the past, I'm going to say about 5, 6, 7, 10 years, is the number of Black women in these organizations, people like yourself, Tiffany, Vanessa, that are just driving this conversation. So Mike, so how, because it's, you know, in that article that Vanessa talked about, Vanessa Daniel, in not supporting Black-led organization, Indigenous people-led organization, and then larger organizations literally co-opting the solutions that the grassroots organizations have come up with. How do we stop that co-opting of ideas, of Black ideas? I mean, I think it's almost like in the fashion world, it's our music, our jazz music, whatever it is. But this is not something new.
Right, but Isabel, I would say that a forum like this is critical. A lot of times what we do when we begin to look at problem solving is we go from identifying the problem to saying, okay, let's do these 3 things. And the step that we're all taking right here, which I am doing in a number of other efforts. So I partnered after I was a part of the Chamber of Commerce, a Recharge Commission, and we were talking about ending racism. So I said, okay, I want to put together an ending racism strategy across government, business, and nonprofits. Because to me, what we the step that we don't want to miss this time is we have to talk about it. We can't be afraid to talk about what's really going on, and hearing as well as listening. And so a big part, I think, of where we get to, whether it's within a company or organization, with the great leadership of Tiffany and Ramona and their teams, the time that people are taking to say, tell me what your experience is. What is your understanding? Do you actually see racism? There are people still who don't necessarily see it. So for my event this year, and thank you, Tiffany and Ramona, for supporting us. We did an Ending Racism theme for our annual event. I did a one-on-one conversation with Dan Helferly, the former head of the Philly Chamber, the head of Independence Blue Cross, talking about racism, what his experience was, and what are some of the things we can begin to do to think about challenging it. But so I would really encourage everyone to find that space. Ramona knows that we did a couple of dinners over the last 2 or 3 years. I got some people together and said, okay, to a white guy I know, look, you invite somebody Black, you do know somebody Black, right? Okay, all right, good. And to myself, he said, okay, Charmaine Smarty, do you know any white people? Yes, I do. I know a couple. And so we started just doing dinners. And the idea was to talk about race, but not politics. So you talked about it, right, Ramona? You talked about it from your own perspective and what your experiences were, to begin to break down some of those barriers, because we need champions in organizations who really believe, who have been able to sort of extricate themselves from the past and are willing to move into a new future. And that begins with listening, with hearing, with building trust. And then we can move on to looking at what are the things that we ultimately want to do and we want to accomplish. The other thing, though, that is critical that I'm saying as a part of this conversation that we're going to do as a part of our Ending Racism strategy is that I want consistent feedback from the grassroots. I want to find ways to, whether it's through focus groups, polling, whatever it is, all of us who represent is great. But I want to hear as much as possible from those who are on the ground. What are they hearing? What are they thinking? What are the things that they want to see us work on? A lot of times they don't get enough bandwidth either. So even as we're looking at African-American leadership, we need to look at the constituents that are in the community to get consistent engagement and voice from them, so that as we're developing solutions, we know that they're ultimately going to meet the needs that they see. I trust grassroots people, because I, like Tiffany, was a poor kid who cleaned houses with my mom until she went back to school and was able to get, as we call it, a good government job. And so that gave me some opportunities to be able to go to college and do other things. People in communities, as you said, Isabel, are creative, energetic. We know how to do a lot with less. People steal stuff from us, but we don't spend all of our time worrying about it. We try to figure out how to create something new. So all of that is like, oh my God, that's great. And now even Citibank, I know you guys have probably done it too, published a report that we have lost $16 trillion in economic value in our society because we have ignored racism and we've missed out on the talents, energy, and financial wealth that could be developed if we can ultimately end racism. So I'm ready to go.
All right.
Whew.
Can someone pass Charmaine? Can someone pass Charmaine a mic so she can?
Exactly.
And Isabel, I know that we're running out of time, but there's something Charmaine said and there's something that Tiffany said that has to be a part of what we underscore today with the question that you asked. There is something about responsible philanthropy that can only come from people who really understand what it is to support communities in need and work with people who are doing those things in those grassroots way as frontline workers. And the resources and experiences that Charmaine brings to the table with her work and the work of her team just cannot be overemphasized, because it's really so critically important to have people that look like me and Tiffany at the table when we're looking at decision making for grant making. It is critically important to make sure we have a diverse team at the table, and that we're not just dealing with one perspective. We look at how we are assessing and evaluating organizations and the value that they bring based upon their missions and purposes.
Okay, first of all, you ladies are all fire. Okay, if I had those little emojis of the fire, that's what I would say. We have 2 minutes left, but I would love to continue this. Obviously, an hour is not enough. I want to, I do want, if you ladies could actually give advice to Bridget Miles. Bridget, the essence of her question, it's not really a question, but she says, I'm intrigued and my mind is swirling on how I can collaborate to ensure a level playing ground, or at least narrow the inequities that exist for our most vulnerable children of color in our public educational system here in Coatesville. One piece of advice to help Bridget in how to collaborate, how she can go about doing that. I'll start with you.
I will just say, for someone who's been working in the school space, I became unwedded to just the system, and I became wedded to solutions. So I'm a big public school advocate for programs and projects that work. I am also a big proponent and actually started a K-8 charter school in my community because I thought low-income families needed choices. And 3, I'm on the Children's Scholarship Fund board because I want to make sure that the tax credit program actually meets the needs of low income and children of color who are also looking for other choices. So I'm a person who believes that all 3 of those structures can work together. What we need to make sure is that parents realize, just like every other American child who has resources, that there are really great opportunities and a lot of different systems for them. And we need to make sure that they all work well for people of color and for children with the least amount of resources.
Yeah. Hey, Isabel, I just want to chime in, and I mentioned I was going to manage the chat, but Murphy's Law has been living in my house. I have been toggling between my computer and my phone, and I just want to lift up some of the great comments that we're getting in the chat. Great panel discussion. Love to keep the dialogue open. And so we are getting a lot of great comments for all of the insight, great discussions that are happening. So I just wanted to kind of lift those up. I see the chat in the chatter. I'm sorry, Murphy's Law lived on my computer and kind of threw me off, but I want to acknowledge all the guests who are listening and very, very much engaged in this conversation. So I just kind of wanted to interject and apologize that Murphy's in my house right now, and I can't control the internet access. So thank you so much, everybody, for the great, great comments. I just wanted to make sure that I said that, Isabel.
Okay,
Thank you.
So we are at 101. However, you know how at late night TV and on 60 Minutes, they have 60 Minutes overtime and you have to go to 60minutes.com to see it. So if you ladies want to continue, I think, we can continue for a few minutes because this is such an intriguing topic. And I want to give Tiffany and I want to give Ramona an opportunity to give some advice to Bridget there. But before I do that, I want to say something before I forget, there was a conversation. I think, Charmaine, you were talking about community voices. And one of the things, it's a big shout out to what we are doing at the Brandywine Health Foundation under the leadership of Vanessa Briggs, is that we are having, this is the Let's Talk series. This is part of the Let's Talk where we are going out to the community. We had I think a 4 series where we actually went to the community and held sessions in Coatesville and listened to the voices who are impacted. How do we show up? Hey, Coatesville, how do we need to show up for you? What are the issues? Because we're not going to come in and tell you, hey, we're here to fix your problems. So I want to make sure that I give a big shout out to our organization. So Tiffany, how can Bridget find ways to collaborate to bring these with other organizations? Because Charmaine gave some examples of how she did it. How can she do the same?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'll try to be as brief as I
yeah, exactly.
as I can. So there are a couple things. One is simply respect the territory by not Columbusing the situation. And here's what I mean by that, right?
Ooh.
Oftentimes when individuals, discover something that is new for them, a new space, a new issue they had not dealt with before, they literally think it's new and that they discovered it. And just know that there are a lot of people who have been working on that land before you got there. So don't recreate the wheel, and do your research and find out who has been doing that work so you can consult with them and offer help to them versus asking other people how to help you with something that's not your expertise. That's number one. Number two, educate yourself on the vernacular of what's happening right now. Can you identify tokenism? Can you identify gaslighting? Do you know the difference between power wielding and power sharing? Are you able to, yes, oh, I'm not racist. Okay, that does not mean that you're anti-racist, right? Because in order for you to educate yourself on those things, you'll be able to then identify when it's happening and stop it, right? Because I think there's a difference between kind of being this passive advocate, like, yes, I believe in those things and I believe those things are wrong, versus actually inserting yourself in the situation and saying, no, I do not allow this to happen. Whether or not the person you're doing it for is an affinity that you represent. Thirdly, diversity does not equal Black. If you mean to say Black or African-American, say Black or African-American. Diversity is inclusive of other segments, whether it be you're a veteran, you're a woman, so Isabel, I think you said transgender. So just remember that. And if you mean to say, that's like, oh, diverse candidates. If you mean to say Black candidates, say Black candidates. So just be a lot more, I think, intentional about your language, because also everything as Charmaine and Ramona has mentioned, yes, 50% of everything we do has to be about 100%, great content. The other 50% has to be about optics. And so when people see that you are that intentional and that serious about this work, then they know where you're at, and then you're pushing them to meet you where you are.
Yep. All right. All right, Ms. Tiffany. So
You've got
all right, Ramona.
you got the experts here, my dear. There's nothing else I need to say. The only thing I do want to say is that it's really important to have an openness to new and different perspectives. And we have to really understand what it means to collaborate. And we need to have an interest in actually doing that. And so when we start looking at how do I level the playing field in my community as it relates to education, you're going to have to bring a whole lot of different people to the table to have that conversation. And we got to be open to perspectives being shared that are not our own views. And we need to understand what that means. But I'm going to mention 2 quick things. First of all, nobody does it better than Charmaine. And especially when it comes to talking about issues of education and our kids. And so really paying attention to what she shared, I think, is critically important. But the other thing, Charmaine, is that I was waiting for you to talk about it's a movement and not a moment.
Right.
Because that is so powerful when you think about what is going on right now and what kind of environment are we existing in. This idea of making contributions that can make a difference and that can help to address the inequities in our society have to go on for a period of time and not for this moment.
Well, see, but that's why I don't have to say anything, because if I put out and continue to put out a good message, it only matters if it really resonates with others and they incorporate it into their speech and make it a part of how they're thinking. So, Ramona, thank you.
And
My job's done.
I love it. This was a great, important and powerful conversation today.
It really was. It really was. And you guys have to see the chat is just exploding, even though we're past the hour conversation. I can't even keep up with all of the comments and questions that people are asking. Great conversation, needs to continue. Is this going to be recorded? What's the foundation going to do moving forward with this conversation? That's good. A movement, not a moment. It's a great conversation. It's relative, reality, lived experience. Thanking the Brandywine Health Foundation team. Next panel, I got to get the chat together. We want to bring people into the conversation. So just wanted to share just a couple of comments that we have. And again, apologize, couldn't bring you guys in because I got kicked off the internet. But again, thank you so much for all these great comments. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Isabel and introduce our board chair, Rick. And I know he has a couple of closing comments and remarks that he would like to share.
Right, and I just want to say thank you, Rick, too.
Thank you, Rick. And Isabel, great job.
Yes, terrific, Isabel.
Great job.
Very, very good.
So thank you, ladies. First, I want to say Kaya Ubuntu. She put it in the comments there. Yes. So I want to echo Vanessa's thank you, ladies. This has been, I promised you guys that it was going to be an engaging conversation, illuminating, and it's a conversation, right? It was a conversation. So I thank you, ladies, for joining us today, for agreeing, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your experience. And I almost feel like we need to just really do this. Just to do it. I don't know. Just get together on a Zoom call. So with that, we will be closing out. And I want to introduce Rick Clark, our board chair, the wonderful board chair that we have. Rick, I met Rick at well, obviously when I joined the board, but when I met Rick at a social function for the Brandywine Health Foundation, I remember I came away, I was like, oh, that's a good dude. I turned around to Vanessa. We had a get together at, whatever the restaurant.
Yeah,
I'm like, all right. And then this crazy man decided he wanted me to be part of his executive team and asked me to be treasurer. I don't know why, but he's crazy and I accept it. So here we are. So with that, I will turn it over to our board chair.
Thanks, Isabel.
Our leader.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I can assure you that other than finding the right Christmas gift for my wife, this will be the hardest thing I have to do this month, is following these 5 ladies. So thank you, Charmaine. Thank you, Ramona. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Tiffany. And of course, thank you, Vanessa. Amazing conversation. You know, the Health Foundation is getting ready to embark on its 20th anniversary year. And with Vanessa's leadership and with the leadership of my personal nonprofit leadership Yoda, Jason Alexander, the prior board chair at the foundation, the Brandywine Health Foundation has embarked on really a transformation that started with a rewriting of our strategic plan, but a transformation of how we go about exercising our mission. And it was really about getting at the social determinants of health, and clearly racial equity and the systemic barriers to racial equity overlay all of those social determinants of health, right? But it's been about what we don't do any longer. We've had to make some hard decisions at the foundation about what we don't do any longer, that either because of redirected resources or alignment with our mission. And then what we do that's new, things like the Let's Talk Coatesville efforts, Todd Pride and Isabel Pryor, our co-chairs of the Finance Committee, are embarking on a mission-aligned investing learning journey within the Finance Committee. So really trying to get our dollars more closely aligned with our mission rather than just focusing on large cap, mid cap, international, domestic stocks, bonds, et cetera, right? The execution of our healthcare and economic relief fund earlier this year under Vanessa's leadership was just amazing to behold, and how quickly it happened. And really it's evolved out of learning at the foundation that trust-based philanthropy, which is really just a better way of saying a focus on general operating grants and really relying on the smart people on the ground, many of whom are here watching us here today, trusting them to know the right way to use the dollars, and then building the accountability mechanisms in. And then also a focus within our grant making committee under the leadership of Hannah Hill and Gwen Dickinson on having a BIPOC nonprofit leadership filter in our grant making as well. So that's something that we're trying to figure out and build into our grant making. So we embarked, my fellow board members supported me in an effort to start a learning journey. So we invested 12 hours in the start of a year-long partnership with the Association for Black Foundation Executives. Tony Simmons and Kumon Morel led us through an amazing start to a learning journey around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really under the strategic effort of getting closer to the folks that we're trying to help in the community by really understanding their experience. And as a 56-year-old white man that came from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, it really helped me unearth, say out loud some interesting things, right, from my background. But I will say that in closing, that I think if you're ill-informed as I was, it's easy to think of racial inequality as a people thing, that all we have to do is fix the way racist people think. And what I've come to realize and be totally moved by in both a positive, but certainly in a negative way, is that it's a system. There are systemic barriers. There are systemic mechanisms that are furthering racial inequity that really are what have to be focused on, right? The people are going to do what they're going to do, but we got to fix the systems. And that's really what we're trying to get our arms around with the strategic way that we deploy our capital and our effort and our influence at the Brandywine Health Foundation. So thank you, ladies. What an amazing effort today. And with that, I will close it and wish everybody a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Good meeting
everyone.
you.
Wonderful